Welcome to our meeting on exercise physiology. We have some really interesting information to cover today, and I want to start with our regular question. And the question today is, in what city was Joseph Pilates born? And we'll come back to the answer at the end of the lecture. The best place to begin is with a definition of what is resistance training. The idea here, of course, is that Pilates is resistance training, but we don't always define it that way, and it isn't always presented that way to the public. And so we need to take that back and own Pilates as resistance training. But you can't just throw around phrases. So when you say Pilates is resistance training or state that we are accomplishing resistance training within a session, you need to know what that is. So here's a little bit about the history. Resistance training goes way back. Hippocrates actually explained the principle behind weight and resistance training when he wrote this great quote, which is, "That which is used develops, and that which is not used wastes away." And that quote is really to define what is progressive resistance training, which goes all the way back to ancient Greece. The really interesting history and one of the legends and lores of resistance training back in that time is that there was a wrestler by the name of Milo. He was from the town of Croton, so ancient wrestler Milo of Croton. And apparently he trained his body by carrying a newborn calf on his back every single day until the calf was fully grown. So what you're looking at is progressive resistance training. The calf gets bigger, the muscles respond. And we will go through some of the theories of muscle adaptation and how this really works. How does a muscle actually get stronger? But let's talk a little bit more about the course of resistance training and what the evolution has been. Resistance training comes in a few forms. In order to actually have true resistance training, you have to have more than gravity. So that can be weight training. It can be equipment or machines. It can be body weight, as long as you use it against gravity, and preferably with the addition of some props that add weight. By the 1960s, machines were introduced to resistance training, and today, actually, statistics show that, in the U.S. anyway, 1 out of 5 women participate in some kind of weight training. And so we are included squarely within that populace. And I want you guys to begin to own that we are providing resistance and weight training. There are pretty much 2 types of resistance training. One of them is elastic resistance and the other is hydraulic resistance. Weight training provides the majority of the resistance at the beginning of each exercise when the muscle has to overcome the inertia of the weight's mass. With hydraulic resistance, things are different and feel different to the muscles. The resistance is actually fixed throughout the range of motion, depending on the speed of the movement. So these are really the equipment that you use at the gym that keeps the weight constant throughout the range. And then, of course, there's elastic resistance, which provides the greatest resistance at the end of the motion when the elastic element, whatever that is, a band or something else, is stretched to the greatest extent. Bungee cords, therabands, and, you might have guessed, springs. So Pilates falls right into the resistance training formula with its use of springs, specifically into elastic resistance. This is the type of resistance training that we provide when you are working out a client on any of the apparatus. So why resistance training? What is it good for? What does it do? Well, it pretty much does everything. Resistance training increases and impacts bone density. It increases and impacts muscle mass, and as a result, increases and impacts your metabolism, which is pretty much what everybody wants to do when they consider training, is have a strong, healthy skeleton with strong, healthy muscles and a strong, robust metabolism. So we're going to talk about how resistance training works, and this isn't at all about the technique of resistance training or how you will actually apply resistance training, but this is just how the physiology of it happens and results in what we mentioned, a stronger skeleton, stronger muscles, and of course an increased metabolism. The first theory you need to understand is the theory of adaptation. And this is really what's going on when we load a muscle. And you'll hear me say that word over and over in training, which is load them up, load the muscle. And that simply means to apply resistance. When a new exercise or stimulus is given to the body responds. And basically the body is in shock. And that response is to improve itself so that it can cope with the stimulus if it encounters that same stimulus again in the future. This is the essence of adaptation and the essence of what happens in your body. And it's really practice. So when we say, you are conditioning your body, you're really practicing for a traumatic event. You run and run, you practice miles, you're practicing for the marathon, but the reality is if you should have to run, if you are being chased by a predator or you need to prevent a tragedy from happening and you find your body in that fight or flight response where you are running, if you are conditioned, you've basically practiced coping with the trauma. Your body has adapted for that trauma so that you are able to call upon it to react in the same way. And this is pretty much what we're doing in all exercises, conditioning our body almost in a negative way so that it responds when it meets that stimulus again, and it can overcome that stimulus without any damage, meaning you don't actually drop dead of a heart attack just by running because you have done it before. You have adapted to that capacity, to that need. So this is the theory of adaptation. It is really the heart of how any training really works. But for our purposes with resistance, just keep in mind that what you are doing is rehearsing for an event. And typically you're rehearsing for some trauma or stimulus to meet the body where you can meet it without a negative result. Now, adaptation isn't necessarily ongoing. And you may have heard of the word plateau. That means that if you are to lift 100 pounds over and over again, your body will adapt. It will adapt physiologically to that. It will tear down muscle. It will rebuild muscle until lifting that 100 pounds is no longer an issue. It is no longer a challenge. The body knows exactly what to do. It has built enough resources to overcome that stimulus. And when that happens, your body is said to be at a plateau. No more changes are occurring. And so it is then up to the trainer to introduce new material, to introduce a new weight, to increase the stimulus, and to basically force further adaptation. So understanding how adaptation works means that we're using a particular technique, this forced adaptation, and that technique is progressive overload. To avoid reaching a plateau, we use progressive overload, meaning that we continually give the body a progressively more difficult and challenging exercise stimulus. The more demanding that stimulus, the bigger response that the body will have, and the attributes will be increased according to that stimulus. In a nutshell, we simply have to keep making the exercises harder. So that brings us to the nuts and bolts of this lecture, which are the actual variables of training. How do we avoid plateau? How do we force adaptation? How can we continually keep our clients progressing, getting more strong, more fit, more conditioned as we go? And there are really 4 variables of training that most personal trainers use within the Pilates teacher training community. I'm not sure how many programs emphasize these, but they are critical for you to know if you want to be able to effectively train your clients and measure their results, which is key to being a professional in this industry. The acronym you need to know is FIT, and that's F-I-T-T. And it stands for frequency, intensity, time, and type. And we'll go through each one of these and see how it applies in our Pilates studio. So let's start with frequency, or the F, which is pretty simple. It's how much or how many. So in our Pilates studio, that looks like 5 reps each of the ab series, or 10 reps each of the footwork, or even 3 sets of the footwork, or 4 for toes, arches, heels, and tendon stretch. So frequency is how many of each exercise, how many sets of each exercise, and maybe even how many total exercises happen within a full session. And there's a little bit of a trouble spot here, because if we're talking about plateaus and adaptation, well, the Pilates curriculum is very clearly defined. You don't do more than 10 of the footwork or each type of footwork ever. You'll only do the prescribed number of exercises, just as Joe Pilates prescribed them, and just as he details in his Return to Life book should be done, never more than the amount that he has written. So if we're looking for an increased load as Pilates practitioners, we're gonna tap out pretty quickly. Once you get to the max amount of load, we don't have carte blanche to just increase. But don't lose heart, there are still things to do. So let's move on to the I. And I is for intensity, which is a great topic in Pilates because we use intensity in many different ways. But according to muscle physiology, exercise physiology, the intensity stands for the difficulty of the exercise you perform as compared to your maximum. So think about that. It's compared to what you can maximally handle. What's the top? What's the absolute highest, largest number of reps or weight that you can handle? And that is, again, not something we often look at in Pilates. We're not looking for the most weight or the highest number of reps. We look at intensity in a slightly different way, but that's okay, and we'll talk about how we can, as Pilates teachers, achieve intensity and what our unique parameters are for that when we are progressing our clients. This brings us to T, which is time, and time is measured a few ways. It's measured by the amount of time the exercise takes. So, for example, if you've done your full footwork, toes, arches, heels, and tendon stretch, that will take a certain amount of time, maybe a minute, maybe 90 seconds. It depends on the tempo of your client and how far along they are in their practice. But there's also the time taken in between. So what happened in between the toes and the arches, and between the arches and the heels, and then again between the heels and the tendon stretch? How much rest time was taken? And this is an area that can typically be improved upon, particularly as you are starting out in your career. The rest between exercises is not an area that you want to drag out, draw out, or prolong. Rest is just that. Time spent not exercising. This is not an area you want to get really good at. Just the opposite. You want to suck out all the rest times from in between your exercises, which means you have to learn to anticipate and you have to stay one step ahead of your clients, knowing always what happens next. So T for time, not just the time the exercise takes, but how much time in between exercises is taken at rest. The final T in our FITT acronym is type, or specificity, which will be the actual move or method. And that can be as broad as yoga or weight training versus Pilates, or as specific as the footwork versus the 100 versus the magic circle. So there you have it. The acronym again is FITT. That's frequency, intensity, time, and type. And again, these are the variables of training. These are the techniques that we can use to affect progressing our clients, or progressive resistance training to actually make someone stronger. Just to give you a simple example of how this might work in a gym setting, you could grab a weight and do 2 sets of 15 reps of, say, a bicep curl. That would be your frequency or volume. You could use 10 kilo, which would be your intensity. You could use 30 seconds of rest in between the sets, and that would be the time. And then again, a bicep curl would be your type or specificity. If you were to change that and mess around with the parameters, and again, these are your variables, so this is what you're doing, you're adjusting variables, you could have 2 sets of 5 reps. That would be less volume or less frequency. The weight could be higher, so a higher intensity of, say, 25 kilo. You might then take a 1-minute rest, which would be less time, more time actually for rest, or less time in the actual exercise. And again, bicep curl could be the same specificity. So putting that all together, that could look similar in a Pilates exercise. Let's take something like Pilates push-ups, which is pretty easy to package in that personal training way. Let's call it 3 sets of 5 push-ups, right? This is pretty classic, with a 15-second rest in between, or 2 sets of 8 push-ups with 10 seconds rest in between, as we often give our male clients a little bit extra to do. And that still keeps within the parameters of 15, or what the total 3 sets of 3. So you can play with your parameters a little bit, not as much with these numbers, because again, the method is discrete. The system has very clear boundaries about what can and cannot be done or should not be done. So we want to find ways to increase intensity, to increase load, to play with time, all without disrupting the integrity of the system. And this is what is so I think what is the most fun about Pilates is not going outside the system. It's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about digging deeper in and figuring out, what can you do? How can you make this work? What are your options, and how can you get to where you want to go with your clients, all while preserving the body of work that you know and love? So let's take a look at that. Let's start with the first letter, F, which is for frequency. You have a few options here. Initially, for frequency, meaning how many reps or sets do we do, we are in fact graduating clients. So don't throw the book at them initially. Work up to your maximum. Know the maximum reps and sets for each exercise, and start somewhere beneath that so that you can work on the other elements rather than going straight to maximum capacity, and then bring them up to the required number of sets. If there are particular exercises, something someone is working on, a limitation, a restriction, Romana always taught us that an exercise can be repeated in full, once at the beginning, maybe at the middle of the session, in between, say, your reformer and mat, and then once again at the end. As a young dancer with a bum ankle, I did the tendon stretch on the Wonder Chair repeatedly throughout my workout to pay special attention to a particular area. And this is kosher. It's okay for you to take an exercise and repeat it if it is an exercise that is particularly needed by the client. So you can get more reps in that way by taking an exercise that is really going to strengthen someone and repeating it at the regular time in their session, then once again in between, and again at the end. You can even ask a client to take a moment to come in slightly early if it's an exercise that you would trust them with, like say something small and contained, and have them do it before they begin. So these are options for frequency. Intensity is something I want to come back to because it is a particular discussion to have around Pilates. So let's skip over to T for time. And I'll remind you that we're not just looking at the length of time it takes to perform the exercise, but also the rest in between. But let's start with that length of time it takes to do an exercise. If you were to do a very slow crisscross, for example, as opposed to 10 really fast crisscross, you would get a completely different result. So you're getting higher intensity, but you're also getting longer time. So crisscross to the right, hold it, hold it, hold it, and then go to the left and stay, hold is going to draw out the time. You are in charge of time. You can control how long an exercise goes simply with your own cueing. So I caution you, do not put flow before intensity. You want intensity. It is very easy to cheat when you're going too fast, and going too fast doesn't get you to the place you need to with your clients. So you want longer time, you want a higher load. Tempo is going to be your friend. That doesn't mean every exercise should go slow, but it does mean enough exercises should go slow that you are able to effect good loading of the muscles, good form, and then add flow later. The second part of time is those rests, and I will warn you now, they are the enemy. If you add up all the rest periods in between exercises where people have time to fidget and fix their socks and mess with their hair and take a sip of water, you're going to find minutes and minutes of time in the session that was utterly wasted. Your job is not to enforce rests or even make rest time available. That is where flow is your friend. The flow in Pilates really has to happen in between exercises so that you are using transitions, you're using the choreography, you're threading together exercises, and you're sucking up any extra time that isn't being used for exercise and converting it into a calorie burn. So your rest times need to be something you pay very close attention to. That means, once again, you are anticipating. You're ahead of the client. You're already on to the next move. Not that you're going breakneck speed, but that you are, again, taking out unnecessary wasted time and using it effectively so that there is much less rest time than there would normally be. The last letter in your acronym FITT is T, and that is for type. And this is an area you can explore more fully or most fully in the last part of your session, not the A, reformer, B, mat, but C, your what the client needs section. In this area where you're having some fun and selecting exercises, not necessarily going off of a prescribed order, this is an opportunity for you to pick exercises that pair well, exercises that may even fatigue some muscles. You could do an exercise that's heavy on the hamstrings and glutes and then switch to the front of the legs. You can do an exercise for spinal extension and then switch to spinal flexion. This is the time in your session where the type of exercise that you choose is less about the order and system and more about making actual gains in strength. So choose wisely. Start to look at your exercises as little routines or pairs. And you've done a lot of this in homework already, starting to put together programs each week. But one of my favorite combinations, as an example, to do on the Wonder Chair is the tendon stretch on the Wonder Chair, not the ankle version, but the actual tendon stretch as we do on the Reformer. And then pair that with the table so that you have one exercise where you're doing deep abdominal work, and then you switch immediately to do heavy-duty glute and hamstring work. And I love to do these two exercises back to back because it kind of flip-flops the client and fatigues one area and then goes back to the other area and kind of addresses everything in a very holistic way. So you want to be looking at your exercise selection in a really balanced way, but also in a way that attacks the body, again, holistically. Personal trainers do a few things in their exercise physiology background that helps to get people to a strength place. One of them is this muscle pairing we just discussed, where you use one muscle and then switch to the flip side, or the antagonist. So that's called agonist and antagonist pairing, which is a very effective method of strengthening. They also use range of motion choices, which we sort of avoid as Pilates teachers. We really tend to do full range of motion for each and every exercise. So that isn't something that we look at too much. They also tend to train using large muscles first. And this is really something to pay attention to, because as Pilates teachers, we get into sort of esoteric language around what should be used. And you will find Pilates teachers all over the world cueing clients to target or feel or initiate from tiny, teeny little muscles that they don't even know what they are, never mind how to get them going. It's not really possible to do that. You can't shut off large muscles in your body and ask smaller ones to work. It really works quite the opposite. What you want to have happen is you want to fatigue the larger muscles, and then there's no choice but having the smaller muscles volunteer to do some work. Smaller muscles are just going to hang around waiting for somebody else to do the job. So you can't just tell them, oh, don't use your quads, use this other small muscle. It's not going to work. But what you can do is make people tired. Give them strong exercises at the beginning, strong footwork and strong 100, and get those big muscles out of the way so that all of those other smaller muscles can come up and do their job and sort of join the party. Personal trainers also use volume, or the sets, as markers, as goal markers. So a set is obviously defined as a group of repetitions, or a volume of repetitions that you can barely complete. And actually, personal trainers use that sort of fatigue to say that if you can barely complete the set, then that's where you want to be. If it's easy to complete, then you need to raise the intensity. And we don't really use sets very much because we have the prescribed amount of exercises in each apparatus, and of course that limits us. But I think it's important to note that we do use volume, we just don't give it enough attention. For example, the simplest example of this is the beginner system is X number of exercises on the mat and X number of exercises on the reformer. So in total, if you were to do every single beginner or basic exercise, there's a finite number of exercises to be given. Over time, of course, as we graduate our clients to intermediate, we add exercises. We add a lot of exercises. So the volume, the sheer volume, is increased exponentially. I always sit with my clients at the end of a session and say, these are the exercises you did today. It took us this amount of time. Our goal is to get to all of these exercises and have it take the same amount of time. So, of course, flow is increased. Just the ability to execute exercises is increased with less instruction. But we do use volume, and we use it as a measure of success very much in this system, and I don't think that we pay enough attention to it. So draw your clients' attention to the fact that we will be doing more exercises in the same amount of time, and that is a good barometer for their success. Personal trainers use another element, which is gravity. They use this very well in training clients, and we do also, but we don't pay much attention to it. So I want you to be aware of exercises that work against gravity, and it's really just to bring your attention to it because that is resistance training. If you are lying on your stomach and you lift up against gravity to do the swimming, you are working against gravity. If you're lying on your side and you're kicking your leg up and down to the ceiling, you are working against gravity. Just your push-ups and planks. If you curl up in the 100, you are working your abs against gravity. So make sure that, again, that you draw your client's attention to the fact that it's your body weight plus gravity. There's this extra added component. It's not just that you have weight because you're working against gravity, but when you position your body in different angles to work with gravity or against it or even eliminate it for people who are very limited or restricted, that is a tool. That's an effective resistance training tool. So we stand alongside our personal trainer colleagues in that respect. We use gravity all the time. Just be aware that you're doing it. Make note of it. What happens when you have someone sitting up on the box in the tree and then they tip back? Suddenly gravity's in play. When they were sitting up, it wasn't so much in play. But when you lean back, all of a sudden your abdominals have to do something. That's because gravity is weighing down on you at a different angle. So use it wisely. It is your friend. Personal trainers and bodybuilders also use the concept of failure, which I mentioned very briefly just a moment ago, but I just want to bring your attention to it. So failure is when you've done enough reps at enough intensity that you cannot complete the rep. You're doing bicep curls, the weight is 50 pounds, you do 8, 9, 10, 11, and by the 12th one, you can no longer curl your arm up. The muscle just quits. This is called failure. And if you're bodybuilding and looking to tear down muscle and build up anew, this is an effective strategy. Pilates doesn't do this. We quit long before failure becomes an option. I will say that research has shown over and over again that you can make significant gains without employing failure as a gauge or as a technique. So don't freak out that we don't do that. I do encourage you to find the place of fatigue in your clients through intensity. But you want to do this without altering the system to where it's unrecognizable. That wouldn't serve anyone. We are accomplishing a lot of things in the Pilates system simultaneously. This is a full multitasking system. So do not sacrifice all of the benefits of the system to just go after one thing. That's cutting your nose to spite your face, so to speak. Okay, so we're just going to recap again for our own purposes. How do we get stronger? How does a muscle get stronger? A muscle only strengthens when it's forced to operate beyond its customary intensity. So that's whatever's usual, whatever's customary. That means it has to be loaded or overloaded. Overload is progressive. You can progress the load by increasing the resistance. You can progress the load by increasing the number of repetitions. You can progress the load by increasing the number of sets of a particular exercise. And my favorite one, you can progress the load by reducing the rest between exercises or sets. This is going to be a key tool for us as trainers. And just one more reminder on this. It's not how fast you go in the set. Sometimes more strength is gained very often by going slower. But it is how you quickly transition to get to the next exercise so that there is no rest, there is no downtime, there is no time for muscles to turn off necessarily, readjust, and that you are making the most of your exercise time. All right, so I'm going to tell you a shameful, embarrassing little story about my studio, because I think it's important, and I think that you should learn from our mistakes than teachers that make these mistakes. I was in a cafe local to the studio. There was a very long line. It was a popular cafe. Everybody knew me there. They've since closed. I'm kind of happy that that happened, but not so happy because it was a good cafe. Nonetheless, the proprietor was working the register that day, and there were many local moms online, and the proprietor yelled out, "Oh, Alicia, have you met so-and-so? She runs the Pilates studio," she barks out to this full cafe. And I'm so excited because this is like a real opportunity to garner more clients. And if anyone in the neighborhood hasn't heard of us by now, I'm thinking this is really going to sway them. And the particular woman that she was talking to, who was right in front of her, looked back to see me 10 deep at the line waiting to pay and said, "Oh, yeah, I've been there. I was there for a lesson, but I didn't really get a workout," she says as loud as she can. There was too much talking. And of course I cringed and wanted to crawl under a rock and die. Let this not happen to you. The purpose of this lecture is not just to educate you about exercise physiology, but to remind you that if you're doing your job, really doing your job well, there's no time for idle chit-chat. That happens maybe at the beginning of the session and at the end, but not during the actual workout. So hold yourself accountable. You are not there to be good friends with people. You are there to train them and to get results. And then they will be your friend, but you're not going to come at this from, let's be social and let's chit-chat away, because it happens in studios all over the world. Pilates teachers like to talk a lot and like to eat up a lot of valuable exercise time by being the star of the show with your conversation. Don't do that. You're not the star of the show. Your client's the star of the show. Be accountable to them. Track your work. How many exercises did you do? Are they progressing? Are they better than they were a month ago? Are there exercises they couldn't do that they can now? Are you choosing exercises that will help them do that? Your job is to make them stronger. So keep yourself on task. I want to take a moment to talk about focus in Pilates and the idea of mental conditioning, because we have something particular that we do in Pilates that is special and actually plays into strength training, and this is important. I hate the expression mind-body. It sounds so crunchy granola to me, and Pilates is so not crunchy granola to me. It's extremely pragmatic exercise. So whenever anybody says mind-body, I think, oh, mind-muscle. Mind-muscle. That is what we do here. And I would share with you a little bit of a quote that I read, which talks about how additional forces come into play, mental forces come into play during strength training. So listen to this. Additional forces and influences can be generated through the muscular tension developed via intention. Intention is the response to the neurological effort put into the exercise or apparatus. In other words, the resistance chosen and its manipulation via the properties of the equipment will provide one influence or challenge, and the mental choices made by the user can result in additional forces that may generate additional influence or challenge. So the device is imposing a specific set of forces on the joints and tissues, and the direction one pushes or pulls, knowingly choosing or unknowingly, can impose a second set of very real forces on the joints and issues. So this is important. This just demonstrates exactly what we do in Pilates, which is that your mental effort will increase strength, will garner results. It isn't just about how much resistance you're working with. It's how much resistance you mentally put into each exercise. And that effort comes from the instructor. So this is your job. Your job is to bring your client to their maximum mental capacity to push their own bodies forward. And remember that you are training them to own their own practice. You don't want to hold anyone's workout hostage. You're there simply as a guide. So be aware, it's extremely powerful. That mental conditioning aspect of Pilates is very, very powerful. Okay, so this will begin my overall recap. So just to remind you, we talked a little bit about muscles, and we learned about the techniques that personal trainers and bodybuilders might use to change bodies or their clients' bodies. We discussed a little bit how that's different from what we do. And we've looked a little bit just at the differing philosophies on these seemingly different techniques, but also where they cross. And is there a way for us to borrow and actually apply some of the more mainstream ideas around exercise physiology? So here we go. Large muscle groups. Remember, you can target them. It is okay for you to let people use their quads. The only time you want to not let them use their quads is when they are cramping or gripping or doing something that you feel is imbalanced in the body. But don't keep telling people to not use their quads. It's okay for them to use their quads. What you really want is co-contraction. Use your quads and your hamstrings so that you can balance the whole leg and rather than just one side of the leg. Muscle pairing to achieve fatigue. Do again just that. Use hamstrings and quads. Do the biceps and the triceps. Grab your magic circle and do some pumps in the front and some pumps in the back. It's the greatest way to fatigue and condition muscle groups is by pairing them. How can you go back and forth with that wonder chair, tendon stretch, and table? Like, are there other pairings you can find that give you opportunities to flip-flop in the body and get a really, really good, strong workout for someone that results in actual strength gains? Increasing the load. So you can step things up a little bit. Maybe the arm weight series can be 2 pounds. Maybe it can be 3 pounds. Maybe you can use more weights in your mat class even to play around. How about teaching the rowing on the mat? That can be incredibly exhausting and terrific to build strength. Really terrific. Increase your duration. Do more reps or do slower reps. How about that? That gets you more time just by doing slower reps. Big one, decrease the rest. Decrease your rest time. There is no rest time in Pilates. Pilates is one long piece of choreography from start to finish. Range of motion choices, and we talked a little bit about how we usually focus on going to that full range, but you can play a little bit with this here. There are opportunities like the way we pulse the magic circle in those short range. That's a short range exercise, and even some of the pumping on the wonder chair where the pedal doesn't move so much, those are shorter range exercise. But I'm a big fan of using the magic circle for the legs, for the arms, as short range exercises. They're small contractions, and you can make good use of them to balance out our more full range of motion as we use in the rest of the system. Please remember that adaptation is really your enemy. The second your client becomes very good at something and has adapted to the exercise, it's time to up the ante. You are not looking for adaptation. You don't want them to get good at it. It's time to change direction, change gravity, change the load, change the duration, change the volume, do more exercises in the same amount of session time. Do not sacrifice mindfulness. You want that mental focus, that intense concentration to create more resistance. Your cueing will bring this to bear with your clients, so make sure that you are constantly cueing their focus, that you give them things that challenge their mental capacity as well as their physical, so they really have to fight for each exercise. They'll be your friend forever if you do this. And consider your props. It's a good idea to make use of those smaller props, the weights, the circle, even your bars, the roll-up bars. They're great tools, and we sometimes forget about them. The dowels on the on the Cadillac, on the tower mats are very useful tools. Like, you have a lot of props around you. Even the straps on your mats or Cadillac are useful. Like, they sometimes get ignored, but if you slip a foot under there, use it. Use the resistance. Use the tension. These are all places to amplify resistance and get more strength. And after all, that's why we're here, is to get more strength. I would add that the Pilates field is very competitive, and they're going to be great teachers, and you want to distinguish yourself by the type of Pilates you deliver. Obviously, you deliver real Pilates, but what does that mean? Like, what is that? Is that athletic Pilates? Is that vigorous Pilates? Is that slow breathing Pilates? Like, what does it mean to do real Pilates, and what are you selling to your clients? So, by my way of thinking, real means it serves your real life. If you do real Pilates, you can do pretty much anything else. You can rock climb, you can ski, you can snowboard, you can do fun things because your body is prepared for it. But that means really, truly prepared. You're strong, you're mobile, you're coordinated, you have confidence in your movement. So all of these things combine to hopefully help you stand out as an instructor. I know that Mr. Pilates, in his delivery of the method, was dynamic, it was vigorous, it was athletic. He was looking to make gains, to reshape bodies, to reinvent bodies, to restore bodies, to return them to life, in fact. And I think that even the construction of our apparatus is probably somewhat less resistance than it was, simply because we have learned to technologically advance the equipment. But I think if you went back in time and rode on those original reformers without any padding, you'd find they were pretty darn strong. They created a lot of resistance. So I know that those apparatus work, and I know that they still work today, but you have to be very careful with your selection of exercises and your delivery of exercises. I hope that this has been educational and that you make good use of this content in your sessions every day, not just for your clients, but also for yourself. Have a great week.